We're here with our buddy Jim Trusty, lawyer extraordinaire and dear friend of mine. Jim, welcome to the show. Pretty extraordinary, isn't it? Donald Trump wins, and now Jack Smith, the unconstitutional rogue special prosecutor, is now talking with the Department of Justice on how to withdraw from these federal cases. Do I have that about right?
That's what I'm hearing. You know, DOJ is not being direct about it. They're sending out little bits of leaks. And so, you know, look, my concern is that they would be political to the bitter end and that they would want President Trump's fingerprints on the dismissal. But seems to be getting some momentum that Jack Smith and the Attorney General who supervises him may realize it's not really worth hanging on for a couple of months and that they would actually bail out and pretend it was a very highly principled decision at this point.
Well, if they didn't bail out, they'd still wind up having a problem, wouldn't they? Because if you're Trump's lawyers and they don't bail out, and this Judge Chutkan, who's very friendly to the Democrat Party in this Department of Justice, she keeps ruling and wants a trial and all the rest, couldn't they just file motions, go on appeal, talk about those memos at the Department of Justice, that this is going to make it difficult, not just when he's president, but in the lead up to the presidency, he prepares to be president. I mean, they're playing with fire anyway, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, look, the mischief can come over the next couple of months. If Judge Chutkan and Jack Smith got their heads together and said, let's go ahead and have a hearing about this immunity issue. Remember him dumping thousands of pages, hundreds of pages in a motion that was way beyond the limits of the page limits. You know, they could absolutely have a little show trial and have a whole bunch of evidentiary information put out there to say President Trump was really, really, really guilty before they walk away from the case. So there is room over the next couple of months for some mischief by Jack Smith, particularly in the D.C. court. But again, ultimately, with the Senate flipping to the Republicans, the president's perfectly positioned to never even have to issue a pardon for anybody because the attorney general should get confirmed, and the attorney general could walk in on his first day and say, Jack Smith, you're done. Enjoy Holland. You're going back. Yeah. So I think the cases are dying one way or another on the federal side. And maybe the attorney general recognizes that and says, well, let's pretend we have some fealty to our internal policy, some loyalty to the idea that we don't try to interfere with elections, which, you know, comes about 2 years late, but I guess it's better than nothing.
Let's look at this case in Manhattan in particular, and I guess it's on appeal. Actually, no, the judge is going to make some sentencing decisions, but it is on appeal, too. How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, that's the hardest question because I think Georgia may die of its own weight. All of the misconduct by Fani Willis is going up to the Court of Appeals. I think arguments in December in Atlanta. And that case may just fizzle out on its own for a variety of reasons. But in New York, you've got the judge announcing that in about a week he's going to tell everyone what his position is on presidential immunity. I know how I would bet if I'm going to have to, put money on this. And then on the 26th, he's got a sentencing scheduled. And so it gets really interesting at that point. You know, this is a case that was inventive from the start, nonsensical, criminalizing non-disclosure agreements that are not criminal. But if it is something where this judge wants to send his politicized message and say that he wants President Trump to go to jail, I'd expect a flurry of stays, motions to stay in New York, motions to stay with the federal court. And I think that the president will end up being okay in terms of never having to serve any time in jail, even if this judge gets hyper-partisan and does that. But the bottom line is, on appeal, that case is doomed. I mean, even in a New York appellate court, there were so many fundamental errors to that case in terms of other crimes evidence being presented, in terms of shielding the defense from knowing what the felony theory is until closing argument. I mean, there was just nothing recognizable about that case, including the very inventive charging decision. So I think it's going to go to the president's way at some point, but it might be a year or two before the appeals are done.
But what would you do? It seems to me I'd do one of two things, and I'm sure his lawyers are pretty sharp. You know them. I think I'd do one of two things. I'd immediately move on appeal. Okay, he's elected president of the United States. I'd pull these memos out, make them part of a motion. These memos from the Department of Justice, and I would argue, number one, the exact reasons they use against charging and actually prosecuting, and they have other arguments in there too beyond the initial stages of a criminal case. A president of the United States applies to a man who's elected president of the United States. They even talked about in there, no, you can't put off sentencing until after he's president because that's hanging over his head and his responsibility to represent the American people and foreign powers, and this undermines him. It's remarkable, the 73 and the 2000 opinions there, which are really complementary from two different administrations. They talk against all this. Now, we've talked about this a little bit, state jurisdiction versus federal. This isn't a state jurisdiction issue. This is a presidential issue, which is why a federal court might take it.
I agree. Look, I think at the end of the day, even if a federal district or circuit court is reluctant, the Supreme Court, which is not an aggressive court when it comes to getting involved in federal election litigation, as we know, right. They're not unaware of this kind of Gulliver's Travels notion of state prosecutors around the country, the Lilliputians, trying to tie down the giant, this being President Trump. I mean, I don't think it sits well that lawfare is now so publicly exposed that the Supreme Court would just let it slide and let a sitting president or soon-to-be sitting president go to jail even for a day on some ridiculous state case. So, again, there's procedural issues there. There's constitutional issues, supremacy clause, a lot of things to talk about in terms of how you get to federal court. But I think at some point in the process, if a state judge tries to tie down this giant, there's going to be people that come into his rescue, as they should, under notions of federalism.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So basically, they're not going to get what they want. What do you think this judge is going to do in a week or two? I mean, he's a real loose cannon, this guy.
He is. And look, I'm not, I've been in the system for 35 years, 27 as a prosecutor, 8 as a defense attorney.
By the way, you sound like you've been to prison. You've been in the system for, I'm just saying, it's funny. Anyway, go ahead.
Mark, I'm parole eligible in just 2 more years, so I don't want to screw this up.
I'm all for you, brother.
But look, at the end of the day, this judge, I think, has shown a remarkable willingness to tolerate inventive prosecuting ideas. And this is not a case that, this is a zero loss situation with non-disclosure agreements that are just simply not criminal. And all of it got criminalized because of one person, which fulfills campaign promises, unethical campaign promises from prosecutors. So I think that overall context is not good when the case comes up on appeal. When I was a prosecutor, we'd say bad facts make bad law, meaning you can stretch to get your conviction. But when an appellate court sees that you've been stretching, you've been innovative, you've been singular in your treatment, it's going to come back to bite you and create bad precedent. So I think that's how this all plays out. I don't know what this judge is going to do. I would think, a real prosecutor, if Alvin Bragg was serious about, I'm just trying to have accountability, he would have announced he's not trying to put this man in jail. Not because he's President Trump, but because nobody gets put in jail for this stuff. But he hasn't done that. I assume that the conversations behind the scenes, I don't know this, are that they are going to ask for jail. And this is the type of judge that might do it because of Trump derangement syndrome or whatever we want to dress it up as. So, again, I would be writing up the stays now to go to the state court and to eventually go to the federal courts and say, this is an impossible situation. Stay the execution of the sentence until the appeal is heard, which in New York is probably a year or two. I mean, it's going to be a while.
Yeah, but my view. I'm like... I've litigated a lot on. I've litigated a lot on constitutional issues, and you got to really step it up. And I'd file a cert. I don't care if it's what kind of, you're requesting a common law to get it to the Supreme Court. They can either accept it or not, and I think they would accept it under these circumstances, rather than going through the entire New York appellate system or let's get it into the federal district court. I'd say, you know what? We have a major constitutional issue teed up here because of him. The local prosecutor and him, the acting state judge. We have a man that's about to get sworn in as president of the United States. We have these memos from the Department of Justice. This has to be resolved before he's sworn in. So Supreme Court, you're going to get it eventually. You got to deal with this now. You put the cert in there, the common law cert, you get it to their steps, and they can take it or not take it. It's been done before.
Yeah. Look, it's the only difference between you and me on that is kind of a tactical one, which is, do I look better to the Supreme Court if I try to exhaust the other options first? Do they appreciate?
But you can't take 2 years
at a lower level. Well, agreed. But I mean, all of this, I'm talking about stuff where you file it, probably after the judge makes the decision on immunity, which is still before the sentencing actually is scheduled.
Mm-hmm. What a mess they've created here, huh, Jim? Have you ever seen anything like this?
No. I mean, look. 35 years, what I've always focused on when people talk about how did you represent President Trump, he's a horrible, evil orange man, I've always said, yeah, but I know the Department of Justice, and I know when I'm seeing something that's different than any time in history about how prosecutors are treating this man. And that makes it very comfortable to defend him because of all the singular moments of inventiveness that these prosecutors have had. I think there's so much lack of ethics that, we could spend years dissecting all of the conduct that these guys engaged in over the last 4 years.
And you get along with them pretty well, as I understand, no?
Yeah, look, I guess that's another way of saying I'm old as hell. I've known a lot of the people that are involved in these prosecutions. I didn't know the state people, but on the federal side, Jack Smith and I were at the department at the same time. I didn't come into it with some sort of animus towards Jack. We did gang cases when I was the chief organized crime and gang section in Nashville, where he was. We got along fine. But I think the way it played out is Jack was kind of a missile, and the administration wanted to launch him, and he's got a desire to take down high targets. And that's not necessarily a recipe for justice. When you come at it from a perspective of, I want to have a trophy, I want to take down somebody that's big, whether they're Democrat or Republican, it's not really what justice is supposed to be about.
And, of course, he has a very troubling record. He doesn't win many cases in front of the Supreme Court, whether you go back to the Virginia case or these two cases he's had in front of the Supreme Court since he's been this unconstitutional special counsel. He doesn't win many of these Supreme Court cases, does he?
No, I mean, look, what he has is short-time wins, short moment wins where you win a trial, but then it goes up on appeal and the court says, again, same recipe. You're being too inventive as a prosecutor. If you have a situation where, let's say you have gold bars in your apartment and you passed legislation or made decisions that help the Egyptian government, to pick one straight out of New Jersey, there's no question that that's a violation of federal law. You know that we're talking about bribery. It's nothing creative, nothing inventive. But in Jack's cases, the common denominator, particularly in the Trump cases, is we're scratching our head saying, how did that become a violation of federal law? How is it for the first time a violation of federal law for a president to retain documents that every modern-day president has retained after they left office? How do you distinguish between Joe Biden in Delaware possessing these things for a book and President Trump having these documents when he was allowed to have them and when we expected him to negotiate with the archives for many, many months or years? So again, I look at procedural moments of distinction, of individuality and treatment. And that seems to be something Jack's very comfortable with in his quest to bring down political figures.
You're listening to Jim Trusty, a buddy of mine, really a great lawyer. Jim Trusty, do you think, this is just a gut, do you think that Biden will pardon his son, or do you think he'll keep him as a convicted felon and Donald Trump might announce that he'll pardon him? How do you think this is going to play out?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, I think at the end of the day, Biden is going to do it. It might be New Year's Eve, but I think he's going to say, these were horribly politically motivated. The greatest irony in the world, right? President Biden announcing these were politically motivated prosecutions that were unfair. I kind of feel like raising my hand and saying, can we talk for a minute about President Trump? But the only thing that mitigates against him doing the pardon is this was forever a silo attempt. This was an attempt to pin on Hunter, the bag man, a little bit of exposure, probably not a jail case, while announcing there's nothing else to see here about a pay-for-play scheme. Don't worry about the rest of the Biden family making millions as government servants. Everything's fine. So I always felt it was a very siloed, very politicized prosecution in a different way than, say, Abby Lowell would say, representing him. And it may mean that he wouldn't really face any trial after this, any jail after this, when the sentencing takes place. But, I think safe money is that Biden will just sneak it out there towards the end of December and say, I'm a family man and I've got to protect my son. I
agree with you 100%. As a matter of fact, he'll do it in a self-righteous way. A dad would do this for his son, right? Something of that nature.
Yep.
Well, Jim, you've been great. We're going to keep bringing you back. When it comes to the tough cases, really, there's nobody better. And remind everybody of your firm again.
I'm at IFRA Law, a little boutique litigation shop in D.C., right around the corner from the White House, and we do all sorts of stuff in the world of white-collar defense. We have a lot of fun, a lot of different types of cases, including that year that I represented some guy named Donald Trump. So it's all good. But thanks for the plug. Always great to talk to you, Mark. I appreciate it.
Now, the audience loves you, Jim. It's true. Thank you, man. God bless. Take care of yourself. There he goes. This guy, he's a great litigator, folks. You know, I've seen them come and go. I know these guys. I don't know them all personally, but I've seen them, so I know the best, and I know they're not so good. The slip and fall, he's among the best.